Hey there, so I recently went on a wilderness backpacking trip in Northern California. Many of you will have seen the videos about it. Many of you also asked about my experience out there, if I saw a bear, or what if I saw a bear, or how would I deal with a possible bear attack. Yes, I did see a bear about 100 yards away from my camp. I will tell the story in a few minutes. And so I recorded another video in which I mentioned that I had written a story about the incident with the bear and the entire backpacking trip. This was in the Marble Mountains of Northern California. I was offering the story, it's a 17-page story, as a PDF ebook, and I was offering it for sale along with my other 4 ebooks at a donation basis. And so thanks to several dozen people who went ahead and picked up a copy of that, as well as my other ebooks. But tens of thousands of people saw the videos, and so I thought more people would be interested in hearing the bear story, as well as information about bears and how to avoid a bear confrontation, etc. Now I'll just mention really quick here that the ebook offer is still valid, so if you want to get the bear story, but also my other ebooks, see below the information. It's really simple. You can send me a donation on PayPal or support me on Patreon, and I will email you the ebooks. Really easy, and I certainly think that you will get some value out of these books about my travels and various other experiences. And so before I actually tell the story of the bear encounter, then I wanted to address 2 critical issues. First is, why would you go into the wilderness when there are scary bears out there that might try to eat you? And number 2, how can you best avoid a confrontation with a bear? So issue number 1, why would you even go into the wilderness when there are bears there? And to that I would say, why would you go to New York City? There are thieves there are rapists, there are murderers. You could get scammed, you could get hit by a bus, there are terrorist attacks. So, you know, any city in the world, anywhere in the world, then humans do bad things and accidents happen and all kinds of stuff. And it is a risk just going basically anywhere you might go. And despite the risks, then people go to New York City, millions of people visit there every year, and millions of people live there and live out their lives and don't have any of these problems. The idea that, well, you shouldn't go to the wilderness because there are risks doesn't make any sense to me, because there are risks with anything you do in life. Why would you drive a car if you are concerned about risks and possibly getting injured or dying, when car accidents are one of the leading causes of death around the world? And yet we all get in our automobiles and drive around every day without even thinking about it. So the fact that there are bears in the wilderness is not, to me, a good reason not to go there. Bear attacks are extremely unlikely, but despite the fact that a bear attack is unlikely, they still do happen, and you want to do everything you possibly can to avoid the possibility of a confrontation of some sort with a bear. And so there are various things that you can do. Now, the most effective would certainly be to have a gun, and people mention this, you know, in my various wilderness videos. Why don't you have a gun? Maybe you should get a gun, etc. The problem with guns is that you have to be a proficient gun enthusiast, firearms expert, in order to be able to shoot a gun. You don't just go to the store and buy a gun and then say, well, I got a gun, all right, I'm all ready. I had a BB gun when I was a kid. My dad had a few guns and I shot them a few times, but other than that, I have very little experience with guns. I'm not about to go start, you know, on a whole hobby of learning how to shoot guns. And even if I did, I wouldn't really want to bring them into the wilderness. Many of these wilderness areas, then guns are not even allowed. Almost nobody you see out there have guns with them. And so guns just aren't a practical solution to this for me, maybe for other people, but most wilderness enthusiasts, most backpackers and campers are not going into the woods with a gun. Now, another form of protection against bears is bear spray, and a more practical solution than having a gun. There are various pitfalls with bear spray as well. First of all, you want to avoid ever getting to the point that you actually have to use bear spray, because that means you are like, you know, 15 feet or whatever away from the bear, and that is a critical life or death situation in which there is no guarantee that bear spray is actually going to work. Even if you manage to spray it properly, whether or not the bear then runs away from you or maybe goes into flight or fight mode and actually attacks you instead of fleeing. But also there's the issue of it possibly not working properly. I saw a TV program recently of a guy that was attacked by a bear. He had bear spray and tried to use it, and it malfunctioned, and he got mauled anyways and luckily survived, but with serious injuries. And so bear spray is a last resort option that you might as well have just in case, because it could potentially save your life, especially if you're going into grizzly territory, because grizzly bears are more aggressive than black bears. Black bears are very easily scared off. Just make some noise or whatever, and that is the ultimate solution, I will say, when it comes to avoiding bear incidents, is just making a noise, making your presence known, and scaring them away. And so there are lots of ways to avoid a bear confrontation without getting to that very critical point of being feet from a bear and having to resort to using bear spray. But ultimately, the best way to avoid a bear confrontation is to make noise and get rid of your smells that tend to attract the bears. When it comes to smells, then it's obvious you just deal with your food and other smelly items like toothpaste and chapstick, bug spray, or anything that has any kind of an odor to it that might possibly attract the nose of a bear, because bears have incredibly sharp noses. And so if you can cut down on the smells, that will avoid a bear coming in your direction looking for the source of that smell. So on this recent trip of mine, then I showed that I got a bear barrel, which is a device that you put all of your food and other smelly items into, and then you twist it up, lock it tight, and then instead of having to hang your food, which is more of a pain in the butt, having to find a tree limb that is sticking out and have a rope, and you throw it over the rope and then pull it up there and then tie it, and then maybe later you realize, oh, I forgot to put the cookies in the thing, and then you have to go do it all again. With the bear barrel, you just stuff it in there, close it up, and then set it under a bush, or just anywhere, just on the ground, a little ways away from your camp. And then if the bear comes along, even if it finds the source of the smells and finds the bear barrel, then it can play around with it or whatever, and it won't be able to get into it, and ultimately it will probably mosey on and not bother you. And so keep a clean camp and try to avoid eating crackers and lots of crumbs get all over the ground near your camp, washing your dishes and leaving a bunch of food particles nearby. Just kind of keep that in mind as far as the smells, in order to avoid smells that might attract a bear. And then secondly, and really this is the most important thing and the best way to avoid a bear attack, is to make noise, make your presence known when hiking, especially if you're hiking alone and not talking with somebody. Then yell into the air. I've shown this in lots of other videos. I'll be hiking along and I'm yelling just out to the woods, hey bear, coming through, go on, coming through. And chances are they will just wander off and you'll never see them, which is what you want, because it is just not worth the risk and the scary experience of knowing that there is a bear nearby that might even come back, even if it runs off to begin with, which, as you'll see in just a second, is exactly what happened to me. Basically, you want to do everything you possibly can, different techniques, and hopefully one of them will work to make a bear go away. And so getting to the story of my experience sighting a bear on my recent solo backpacking trip in the Marble Mountains of Northern California. It was a 4-day backpacking trip. I drove up there in Siskiyou County, parked at the trailhead and hiked out there. I made an hour-long movie about this whole trip, and so if you want to see that movie, link down below. And so I found this really nice camp at a meadow and stayed there for the first night, and then the next day went on a day hike to find a lake, and found the lake, and in the process found snow, and in the snow I found bear prints. And so that really drove it home, even though I'm still bear aware. I've done lots of backpacking and camping, and as long as I know that it is bear country, then I am very, aware and making lots of noise and just kind of assuming that there might be a bear somewhere nearby. But that is a, serious wake-up call when you see those very clear bear prints that look fresh and you realize, okay, there's a bear right around here somewhere, and you don't know where it is. But I finished my day of day hiking and got back to my camp and stayed there for the night, and the next day decided to stay again at that same spot and just kind of have a rest day. Later that evening, a few hours later after recording that video, then I had just had dinner, and so I was sitting there just kicking back, watching the campfire and also looking out at the meadow there. And at one point then I looked up and I saw a dark looking furry kind of a splotch. Now the thing is that when you're alone in the woods, then a lot of things tend to look like possible, dangerous animals such as bears. And so you're hiking along or just sitting there or whatever, and you look up and you see something that looks like it might possibly be a bear, and then you look closer and you realize that it is a stump or a bush or something else. And so when I looked up and I saw this dark furry looking splotch, then I looked kind of closely. It didn't seem to be moving, and so I concluded it was one of those mirages. And then a couple of seconds later I looked up again and suddenly it started moving. And then I realized it was not a stump. And so I got up and looked at it more closely, and thought maybe, you know, it could be an elk or a deer or something else, and ultimately determined that is definitely a bear. It was about, you know, 100 yards, maybe 150 yards maximum away, across the meadow, some trees right there. And so the thing is that it is a different issue when you see a bear while hiking versus seeing one at your camp. If you see one while hiking, the exact same, you know, situation, same distance, same spot, but I was hiking along with my backpack, and you see a bear and it doesn't notice you, it isn't coming at you, then you can just keep on hiking and eventually you'll get away from it and you're, you know, free and clear. But in this case, when it is near your camp, then you know that it could possibly find your camp at any time, keep on, you know, rooting around for grubs or roots or whatever, and maybe smell your smells at your camp and end up finding your camp and you. And so you want to avoid that. And so I quickly determined that I needed to scare this bear away and not allow it to just kind of do its own thing. And so I started yelling at it. The problem is that as soon as I started yelling, it looked up and it then started coming at me. Now, I had thought about this beforehand. If I do have a close encounter with a bear, what is the best, most effective way that I can scare it away? And my ultimate determination was my metal pot and cup that I would bang together and make a loud noise and scare it off, because that is really your best defense, is just make noises that scare it, that it doesn't understand, and most likely it will just run off, especially if you're dealing with a black bear versus a grizzly bear. And so I just finished dinner, as I mentioned, and my clean, fortunately, pot and metal cup were sitting on one of the chairs around the campfire. So I looked down, saw it, grabbed it, and started banging them together really loud. And within like 2 seconds, then that thing just jetted off the other direction, ran into the woods, up the hill, and it was gone. But then, of course, you're left worried that it might come back and bother you 5 minutes later, 20 minutes later, an hour later, maybe in the middle of the night. And so one of the problems is that I hadn't actually finished putting all my food into the bear barrel. So I had various food scattered around, and there would be a big difference in the scenario of the bear coming towards me. If the banging of the pot in the pan hadn't scared it off, then I would have had no choice but to run off, get away from the camp, and most likely then the bear would get to my camp, it would smell all the weird smells, and it would be preoccupied with investigating around, and it would also find my food that was lying around, and it would start opening it up and trying to get into it and eating my food. And so if that had happened, then I would have come back to a very messy, chaotic situation of garbage and food just scattered all over the place. And so the much better scenario, if it came to that point, would be if all of the stuff was in my bear barrel, safely locked away, and that way, even if the bear had come back, I had to abandon my camp, the bear would then find some smells and stuff around there, but it wouldn't find any food that it could actually get into. It would investigate, and it would most likely run off, go away much sooner, for one thing, than if it found food there that it could get into. And also, I would come back to a much more likely possibility of a clean camp rather than food and garbage and whatnot strewn all over the place. And so the first thing that I did was I started cleaning up my camp and stuffing all the food and everything into the bear barrel, and then put it, you know, away in a bush or whatever, and cleaned up in general so that I was more prepared for the possibility of the bear coming back. And then I started thinking about it, well, what am I going to do if I'm in my tent during the night and the bear comes back? And what I decided is that I would bring my backpack into the tent with me, my big backpack, empty, not with all the stuff in it. Usually I would leave it outside of the tent under the vestibule. I have a little one-person tent, and I would leave it sitting outside. But for that night, then I decided to bring the backpack inside of the tent with me. And if the bear came back, and then it, you know, decided it was interested in whatever was inside that tent and started clawing at the tent or sticking its nose, you know, into the tent or on the ground under the tent or something like that, you know, trying to get into the tent, then I would pull over my camping mattress on top of me, my backpack on top of that, and then you have at least 3 or 4 layers between you and the bear. Obviously, it is not, you know, perfect by any means, but at least you have some sort of a defense. And even if the bear did come back to the camp in the middle of the night, then that is a very unlikely scenario that it would be, you know, that determined of trying to, you know, tear apart your tent in order to get to you or whatever. And so that was at least something that was a bit of a reassurance to me of I have something to hide underneath in case the bear did come back. Fortunately, then everything worked out. I was certainly nervous through the night, but managed to sleep and woke up in the morning. My camp was undisturbed, it was all fine, and I never saw the bear again. So I got packed up and headed out. That was the last day of my trip anyways. And so that is the way that most bear confrontations go, even if you see one, is if it sees you, then it probably will run the other way. Even if you see it, maybe it doesn't see you at all and it doesn't bother you, but 99 whatever percent of the time, then a sighting of a bear does not result in an actual bear attack. They are very, very, very rare, just a few a year. So the chances are definitely on your side, but you still definitely want to be prepared just in case. And as I said earlier, then just make use of all the possible means that you can to avoid any kind of a bear encounter so that your trip goes smoothly, you don't have the crap scared out of you, and you hike out of there alive and healthy. And so if you want to see the movie about my amazing experience of 4 days of hiking in the wilderness of the Marble Mountains of Northern California, check the link down below. Also, if you're interested in the ebooks, then information below the video here. Take care, happy adventures, stay safe, and see you from somewhere else in the world. Later.